CBT Nuggets CWTS Series Site Surveying and Installation Part 1. Today there's really two groups of engineers in the communications area who are converging into the wireless LAN space, and this is according to the CWNP here. Neither group has the knowledge they need to successfully design and implement and secure, manage, and troubleshoot .11 wireless LANs. Both of these groups have some things they've got to learn. They have to actively move towards wireless LAN expertise. Now, the first group are the legacy Ethernet LAN engineers. These are those wireline people who know about switches, routers, and firewalls. I happen to have fallen into that category before I got into wireless. Wireless was actually, several years ago, a huge paradigm shift for me. I knew how to move data through wires. I knew about routing and switching and all that good stuff, being a CCNP and a CCSP, but through the airwaves, that was a whole new ball game. And the second group is the telephony people who've been creating the cellular phone networks for many years. They know how to move signals through the air, but moving data, well, that's a whole new ball game for them. So what we're going to start to look at here is start building our foundation for installing the site and analyzing the site. Now realize, this is not a full-blown certified wireless analysis professional, but we're starting to build those foundations, those fundamentals, to help you become a wireless analyst. So let's take a look at our topics for this first nugget of this CWTS domain. Now let me just set you up right off the bat to the fact that this is going to be a pretty highly lecture-based nugget compared to a lot of the ones we've looked at so far, and it really has to be. I have to kind of take a almost philosophical approach to site surveying and installation here. So in part one, we're going to cover a lot of the processes. We're going to cover a lot of the overall definitions of what this entire site surveying process is made up of. So we're going to first talk about the information gathering process, which is, regardless of the discipline, whether it be security or network implementation or programming, it's always probably one of the first steps in the multi-phase process. We'll look at defining the physical and data security requirements for the organization. We'll talk about gathering site-specific documentation. What are some of the sources for that documentation? We'll talk about the processes of documenting the network infrastructure, all the different connectivity, as well as power, which is an important aspect, because remember, we have to have a way to power those access points, which many times are not within reach of those plugs. So we want to think about that. We want to understand the different ways to provide RF coverage. And we're gonna keep it simple here, okay? But we're going to give you some guidelines, and then we'll know the client connectivity requirements. We've kind of already addressed a lot of that in the previous nugget on client connectivity, but we'll revisit and reinforce some of those concepts, and then we'll also revisit the concepts behind antenna usage and placement. Now, I don't usually tell my nugget students to take notes. I do in the introduction nugget mention that you might want to outline these. This is one of those nuggets, though, that you might want to consider approaching it like a class lecture and take pretty good notes along the way. Everything I say obviously is not going to be on the screen here, so it wouldn't hurt. Okay. Now, before we talk about the actual process of information gathering, which is really the first phase, the first step of a site survey, why don't I go ahead and define what a site survey is? And I think you already have an idea just by looking back over the landscape of the previous nuggets of what kind of things we're looking for. But it's going to be your map. It's going to be your topology for your successful implementation of your wireless network. And remember the goal here, okay? The primary objective is to make sure that your mobility workers, okay, the wireless LAN clients, are going to have a continually high quality RF connection as they move around the facility or as they move around the campus. Okay, so that's really going to be our goal. The challenge is the site survey is what helps us achieve that goal, because it's a significant long-term evaluation of the wireless local area network. And we're really going to focus on the wireless LAN here, not bridging between buildings or, mesh networking and all that stuff, which are much more advanced topics of analysis. But it's a long-term evaluation because you don't want to be doing site surveys every 90 days, okay? You want to come in, you want to do a really comprehensive survey that you can build on in the future. If there's changes to the topology, if there's changes to the facility, if there's new security implementations or new standards like .11n, you're not going to have to go and do an entire new analysis or an entirely new survey. And again, you may be doing this survey for your company or for a customer or as a consultant or an auditor or whatever. It's going to be, if done properly, a huge time-saving measure and a huge cost-saving measure, because a lot of organizations take this site survey thing way too lightly, and they end up basically in the long run having to come back and redo it again and spend way too much money and way too much time because they didn't do it right in the first place. So by definition, what we're going to call our site survey is a project, and you want to really focus this as a project. Maybe even bring in a PMP to help you with this. It's a task by task project for discovering RF behavior in the environment, for looking at RF coverage, for isolating areas of interference and dead zones, for hardware placement, specifically placing your antennas, your access points, power and cabling needs and configuration as well. So that's what we're talking about. And if wireless analysis is in your future, if you're going to take this CWTS and then maybe move on into the wireless network administrator or wireless analysis professional, then combining the site survey with project management skills is going to be a great thing for you. And we're going to find out how important documentation is in all of this. So let's talk about the first real, part of this process, the first phase, and that's information gathering, where we're going to gather business requirements. We're going to look at interviews and ways to get information from managers and supervisors and users and other IT professionals that may not have expertise in wireless, but their wired expertise is going to be beneficial to us. As I mentioned, the first phase is information gathering, and the first thing you're going to do is go in and find out what kind of business this is. What kind of organization is this? How are they going to use their wireless network? Are they going to start out just by providing guest wireless VLAN access in the foyer of the building or the entry area of the building, or are they going to be implementing this into the enterprise? Are they going to integrate this between buildings? So collecting business requirements, and this is going to be an exhaustive process. You want to understand how they're going to use wireless for productivity. Is it a law office? Is it an insurance office? Is it a medical facility? If it's a medical facility, you have to consider things like HIPAA. If it's a financial organization, you have to consider Sarbanes-Oxley. So you need to collect all the business information and the organizational requirements that you can from the outset. And this is going to be finding key stakeholders and key individuals that can give you that information, not just from a technical standpoint. You have to find the synergy between the wireless solution and what this organization's trying to do. How do they want to use this solution, this wireless solution? And it also means understanding those various deployment scenarios that I showed you in the previous nugget. Are they going to have teleworkers that need wireless at their small office, home office? Are they going to use wireless in the branch office or the remote office? Are they going to need building-to-building wireless? Are they going to have it in the enterprise? Are they going to use 802.1x over .11 and .3. So knowing the different scenarios and knowing the kind of facility that they have is going to help you in making these decisions. You have to also know what are the various emerging options, not just what's available now, but what are the emerging product options from all of the major vendors out there for wireless products. And so this is going to mean going and doing some research on the internet with retailers. And then we're going to go, so once we have that kind of fundamental knowledge base, we're now ready to go really go through the process of information gathering. And this is going to mean interviewing key people. If you're brought in as a consultant, most likely you'll be assigned somebody who has some IT expertise that you're going to work with as your contact person. If it's your own organization, you may be the team leader, or there may be a chief information officer, and he or she may be your main liaison to management. So you want to go through the interview process to interview management to answer kind of the first question, the business and org requirements, and then you're going to interview the key people that know how wireless is going to be used, the key technical people. That may be you, okay? You may have to go out and literally delineate how you're going to use wireless, but you're also going to want to think about, in the interview process, interviewing clients and interviewing end users and how they plan on using wireless, especially if they're going to use different types of proprietary handheld devices. I mean, think about the FedEx person that comes to your door with their handheld device, wireless scanners and things like that. You know, we're not just talking about wireless laptops. We're talking about all different types of wireless devices. So in the interview process, you need to do that. You may also do surveys or questionnaires. And I've got down here as a bullet point, obtain some site survey questionnaires. If you go to the website for the organization that does this CWTS exam, go to that website, CWNP. If you go there, either from them or from other organizations, you can download some site survey questionnaires, okay? And those questionnaires will basically be, asking questions about, is there an existing RF network? And if there is, how long have you had it? Existing RF information. You might want to ask in the questionnaire, what are the peak usage times, okay, for wired and wireless networking. You want to know their existing customer premises equipment. What is their existing wireless LAN environment? Is it campus? Is it in building? Is it building to building? Is it metropolitan area network? What current problems are they having? Okay, you'll have an RF network design questionnaire or survey. For example, are they using IP, IPX, Apple Talk? What protocols are being used, right? A site survey request to ask about the different facility. Are there any special stipulations? As I mentioned, are they under the umbrella of HIPAA or U.S. government or state government or OSHA or workers' unions? Are they under the umbrella of Sarbanes-Oxley or the Department of Defense? So you want to have some good site survey questionnaires, and then probably put together a steering committee, which is going to be all the key individuals and stakeholders and players in this wireless initiative. That's going to include project managers, of course, product managers, people who know about the different wireless products out there. Who's going to be doing the implementation? What's the test scenario going to be? Have you chosen some key power users to help you test your solution? I want to look at some case studies, existing case studies of like organizations, like enterprise businesses that have already done this. Go do your research. You can also consult with the vendors. Whatever hardware solution and management solution you decide upon, those vendors themselves are going to have some available resources for you of how to best implement their solution. Cisco, for example, if you go with that. And then hopefully what you're planning on is, by going through this process over and over and over again of information gathering for preparing for the site survey, you're going to gain the experience that you need. You'll learn from that experience, and then a lot of this will become not so much trial and error or having to start from scratch. You'll be building off your own knowledge base and off your own experience. One of the things that really sets wireless LAN analysis and deployment, what it sets it apart from other types of infrastructure processes, is the fact that as soon as you go through the information gathering process and you answer all the questions and more that we looked at on the previous slide, the next question that comes to mind is security. And this is not something that's surprising because of the nature of RF. It's going through the air, all right? The ingress and egress points of your network, there's no, hard and fast line. You know that RF areas can extend through walls and through the floors of your multi-floor building and through different areas of your campus or your metropolitan area network. So security has to come to the forefront of this analysis process before you even go in and start kind of evaluating the physical facility where you're going to deploy RF. Even if they've already got RF in place now, you want to quickly revisit their existing security policies. What are their physical security policies? In other words, when visitors come to the organization, what types of devices are they allowed to bring into the facility? Are there, guards that they have to check in equipment as they come into the building? So you want to think about all of the places that rogue access points or soft access points on laptops could be introduced into the facility. So you want to think about the physicality. Is this, if you're doing consulting, are they located on the third floor where they've got a different company on the second floor, a different company on the fourth floor? Maybe they exist in one of those corporate business suites that have 3 or 4 floors, and there's about 30 different companies in there. If they're using a wireless, small business solution, what is the impact on the physicality of where they're located in that business suite? You also want to think about what type of data is being transferred on their wireless network. As I mentioned, large enterprise organizations, they may just use their wireless network for guest VLAN access to the internet to do web browsing. But are you going to put up content security to do URL filtering? Is the wireless network going to be part of the enterprise wireless LAN where all types of data is going to be transferred, between to servers, for example, to back-end data servers and server farms and data centers? So, how fundamental is the wireless network to the ongoing business and what's being transferred through the ether? Got to know that. If they have something in place security-wise, are they using pre-shared keys now? Or are you going to look at maybe an EAP solution? In other words, are they doing manual key configuration with pre-shared keys, or do they have a key management system? Is it going to be certificate based? Is it going to be using what are called protected access credentials or PACs instead of certificates? Are the certs going to be server side or just client side? So those are questions. Do they now have, or are they planning to use a .1x implementation, port-based authentication? Are they already using it on their Ethernet? So are they going to use AAA services, or do they have AAA services? Do they have Radius servers? Do they have TACAX Plus servers? So these are all definitions of the existing security posture and the security requirements. We've got to know those things. Now the good news is, at the end of this nugget series, we've got 2 nuggets dedicated to wireless security. Wireless security part 1 and wireless security part 2. So you may want to, consider once you go through that and you go through this series twice, remember all the stuff that you learn in those final 2 nuggets, then come back and reevaluate these security requirements under the wireless analysis process or the site survey process. Do they have an existing acceptable use policy for clients and the way that they can use wireless networking? That plays into security. Do they already have a written security policy with a section on wireless? They should. If they don't, once you finish your site survey and your analysis, you may be assisting in writing that section, which is going to answer a lot of these questions. Written security policies should be specific about the EAP types that are being used, about the acceptable use policy, about physical access with wireless devices, about your .1x implementation, specific about AAA services, all those things. And again, it should all be documented. The entire process of defining the security requirements and the security posture should be well documented all along the way. Okay, using whatever you're using. If you're using Visio to create topologies, along with a word processor or spreadsheets, if you've got site survey forms that you've already pre-created, you want to document everything. Obviously, it's very common sense that you're going to want to gather and collect all the site-specific documentation. This really relates to the physical building, the physical facility. Is there any information in written security policies about their physical security? You want to get access to any surveys or questionnaires that have been filled out, any white papers that have been written by key IT people, any reports that have been done. Maybe you have generated your own reports. Maybe you have assigned some reporting to some personnel that are part of your team. Maybe some project management has been done to assign some tasks to individuals to help in the information gathering process. Any physical topology diagrams. Maybe you've used Visio or some other mapping software, some other diagramming software that's been used on the organization. You want to see the physical topology of where everything is placed, where the server room is, where the wiring centers are, where your power is. That'll involve blueprints, for example. We'll kind of tie blueprints, the need for blueprints, into physical topology diagrams. The logical topology is really we're talking about if they're using IP, for example. You want to know the IP addressing scheme, the hierarchical scheme. You want to know if they're using DHCP services. You want to know what routing protocols are being used, dynamic routing protocols. You want it, so that's the layer 3 and above information. You want to have those logical diagrams. And if any previous site surveys have been done, you certainly want to have that information handy as well. So just gathering together on your steering committee or your implementation team all the existing documentation that's out there. Now, what you're really hoping for as you do this site survey or wireless analysis is you actually have the luxury of going in before any wireless solution has been put in place. With that scenario, you're able to evaluate any possible RF overlap, any other areas that are bleeding into your facility. Like I mentioned, if you're dealing with a facility that is in a multi-story building, obviously the story above you and below you, or multiple stories above and below, that's going to be a factor. If you're dealing with, for example, in one of those business suites, you always want to know first off what type of RF overlap from other cells you're dealing with, and you always want to look at your interference issues. So that's going to involve a couple of things. It's going to involve protocol analyzers and spectrum analyzers, and we'll take a look at those in the next nugget. But let me just show you real quick. Here's an example of Cognio. This is a mobile spectrum analyzer. So this is one you would walk around with. And when you do this kind of wireless analysis or site surveys, often you may have a cart that has, a couple of laptops on it, some equipment, and you're moving this cart throughout the organization. Or it can be a handheld device, and you can see that, you can find, if you look towards the bottom here, you see interference, microwave ovens, for example, and you can get kind of a spectrogram look at this. You can also run traces. You can see over on the right hand side the band that we're dealing with and the center frequency. So a wide variety of different tools, spectrum analysis, protocol analysis, that you're going to want to use. And these are essential tools to eventually understand if you're going to be doing any type of, let's say, wireless analysis, and I would say even wireless administration. If you're dealing with a wireless controller scenario, you may be able to set up some access points in rogue access point mode, so they can detect not necessarily rogue access points, but they can for sure detect any other radios that may be overlapping with your own areas. Remember, a rogue access point doesn't always mean it's a malicious device brought into your area. It could just be overlap from another organization, so keep that in mind. As I mentioned, the best case scenario is to do protocol analysis before you've done any new installation. That's not always a luxury that you have. Okay, so keep that in mind. You may have to come in after the fact and get an idea of the RF coverage of the organization. Again, you want to think about your interference and overlap not just horizontally, but also vertically. You also want to think about if you're setting this up at remote offices and branch offices, their proximity to military bases and airports and things like that before you go in and set up a branch office or remote office or buy or lease that property. So these are things to consider as well. So you might also want to take advantage of any existing survey implementation that they have, any existing software or hardware survey solution. So, these are all factors, again, that you want to think of in the planning phase before you go and you spend any time or money or other resources on an RF implementation. I know I kind of have this far down the list, but this is a really important issue, and it's also one of those things as far as site surveys go that people forget about. They always think about the access points and the controllers and the placement and all of those things, the RF characteristics, and they forget the client, the most important aspect really of any network. So one of the things you have to do, again, in a planning phase or part of this site survey is to evaluate all the different types of clients. Remember earlier, not only did we look at all the different types of, not all of them, but we looked at a lot of the different types of adapters that can be used. You want to think about all of your wireless clients and all the different, emanations and different manifestations that are out there. Also think about any plans for the future to move to wireless clients in any different scenarios. So you want to evaluate all those different client types and client systems. You also want to know what are all the operating systems that are being run on those clients. What version of Windows are you using? What build of Linux are you using, for example? Also, if it's a handheld device, let's say, is it a device that's going to need to use ECC? ECC is a very common type of encryption that's used on handheld devices. So you want to know all your operating systems out there. You want to make sure that you have an inventory of all the different client interfaces and the device drivers that you need. Make sure that they're all updated, as a matter of fact, all the most updated drivers. You want to have client configuration utilities. Are you going to use Windows 0 config? Are you going to use the configuration tool that comes with Linux, the Mac Airport? Or are you going to use a third party? Are you going to look at the vendor that you're using for your hardware on the server side and the access point side, and then go with some type of software that accompanies that vendor's solution, for example, like Cisco? You want to think about client utilities. Are you going to preload these client utilities and agents on the laptops first, or are you going to leave that up to the end user? That's an important consideration. Are you going to allow the end user to set up their wireless connectivity, their VPN settings, or is this something that you're going to do where you're going to have policies or profiles and you're going to preload the laptops and then give them out to the traveling teleworkers and the IT managers and the traveling regional sales managers, those types of things? So you want to think about client configuration. Is it going to be manual? Is it going to be something that's going to be preloaded through a profile? All the client apps being used. What do I mean there? I mean, what are you using your wireless network for? What types of applications are being run? Are you going to be doing SharePoint over those apps? Are you going to be doing large data transfers? Are you going to be doing any other types of audio or video streaming? Trying to do, for example, audio and video streaming and in your home office or small office, and maybe you're doing conferencing or some type of training over the web. If you're using your wireless network, that could have an adverse effect. So you want to think about the applications being used in those branch offices and those remote offices in addition to your enterprise organization. Are you going to be, accessing databases? Are you going to be? Do you need VPN solutions? All these things need to be part of this equation for client configuration. End user security. Are you going to rely on pre-shared keys, or are you going to use some type of EAP solution that allows for certificates, or protected access credentials, or some other mechanism that's not pre-shared keys that uses key management? If it's inside your organization, you may be leveraging Microsoft and Kerberos, as a matter of fact. So you want to think about end-user security as well. It's a key issue. So knowing the client configuration, don't overlook this, the client side of the equation. This is definitely last but not least. As companies go in and they do a site survey, once they've determined the coverage areas that they need, then obviously the next logical thing is what types of antennas are you going to use? Omnidirectional antennas for large open spaces or large square environments, or semi-directional for more rectangular coverage or more directed coverage. Obviously the fully directional is more of an outside bridging between building solutions, but that may be part of your antenna usage solution. So it's obviously looking at the results of your site survey and your coverage, your analysis, your protocol and spectrum analyzers, and determining what type of antenna you're going to use. And a lot of times it will be a combination of different antennas for the right scenarios. You're going to also place your antenna, and you're going to think about multipath issues. You're going to think about other types of interference issues. Are you going to use a patch semi-directional, a panel semi-directional? I didn't even write down Yagi here, but we definitely don't want to forget about the Yagi semi-directional. So what type of semi are you going to use? Are you going to use the rubber duck on the access point itself? Or are you going to use a ceiling mounted or wall mounted omnidirectional, or for directional outside a grid antenna? I was driving by an insurance agency just yesterday and I noticed they had a grid antenna which was hitting a tower downtown. So again, you want to think about this. And when I say think about it, I mean that obviously you're going to think about it and you're going to do it. And there's no way to teach you proper antenna placement. This is something you have to go experience in the real world for yourself and actually do a little bit of trial and error. Once you do place the access point, then you're going to go back through some of those spectrum analysis techniques and analysis tools to find out, are the patterns, the horizontal and vertical patterns, meeting your solutions. You'll roll that laptop around, walk around with that laptop or handheld analyzer once you've got the access point in place, because most likely you'll be going back to the drawing board a little bit, maybe repositioning that access point, maybe repositioning it vertically, for example, or placing it in a different location to get better horizontal coverage. So are you going to be placing antennas internally and or externally? Again, externally, typically you're going to be looking at a semi or a fully directional, okay, for your outdoor. If it's a bridge to bridge situation or building to building situation, bridging, that's the most typical external. Or externally, are you going to be putting in a mesh access points because you need that full any-to-any connectivity in a wireless mesh environment? So you want to think about, if it's external and it's not building to building or point to multi-point, is a mesh solution going to be a good option for you? Remember, a mesh solution is going to be costly. It's going to probably involve some special wireless LAN controllers, definitely special access points for a wireless mesh. For example, if you're put in charge of putting in place a wireless solution for a metropolitan area network or some type of municipality, you also want to make sure that you've downloaded all of the specifications on all of the antennas that you're using, all of the access points that you're using. You want to have all that documentation, either web-based or maybe just hard paper copies of all the PDF files and documentation on every piece of hardware you're using, all the specs, the azimuth charts, all of the things you need to have to do your job properly. And make sure that you download configuration guidelines and configuration guides from the vendors. Make sure that you have facility information. Obviously, you're probably going to combine with this some blueprints or some Visio diagrams of the facility, and you're going to have your access points placed on the diagram so you can easily know where the access points are. You don't want to have to go and find access points by walking around a building and locating them. You want to have them all documented and placed on some type of Visio diagram, which is a physical topology of your access point placement. And maybe even there's plenty of tools out there that'll actually give you graphical representations of the actual RF coverage itself. As a matter of fact, some of the Cisco wireless LAN controllers will actually generate reports that are coverage reports that'll show you what you need. So most of the vendor solutions are going to give you visual, graphical reports and diagrams that you can print out to printers or even plotters to get the stuff you need for proper antenna placement and antenna usage. Alrighty, in Site Surveying and Installation Part 1 of the CWTS series, we covered about 7 or 8 key points. talked about, first of all, we defined what a site survey was, and then we looked at the first process, or first part of the planning, which is information gathering. Looked at defining your physical requirements and your data security requirements as well. Gathering site-specific documentation, the importance of documenting your existing network infrastructure, if you have an existing wireless implementation, any kind of connectivity, knowing where your power is located. I didn't really mention this in the previous nugget because, well, I forgot, but power is a key issue as far as access point placement, because if you're not using power over Ethernet, you may have to actually have, sockets nearby to plug those access points into. Chances are, though, you're going to use switches, multi-layer switches, and wireless special wired switches that have power over Ethernet to get power to those access points. So that's a key issue as well that I kind of glossed over, but just remember PoE. We talked about PoE earlier in this Nugget series, and it's going to come into play with your access point placement. Understanding your RF coverage, I gave you a quick little view there of a spectrum analyzer and a protocol analyzer to give you the idea of what you're going to do as part of your site survey, okay? Knowing your RF coverage. Again, this is knowing, first of all, the interference issues and if any other cells or areas are bleeding over into your facility or into your areas. Knowing your client connectivity requirements and, of course, antenna usage and placement. I hope Part 1's been informative for you. I want to thank you for viewing. We'll see you in Site Surveying and Installation Part 2.